Chapter 14. Lying in a musty jail cell worked wonderfully at calming his rage. The back of his head throbbed where a goose egg had formed when he'd made contact with the wall. He flexed his fingers, testing the joints. He had swelling there, too. Lying still for an hour or more, he'd let his mind drift and his body relax. Every now and then he heard voices, small groups or couples walking outside, leaving the event. The lamp in the jail illuminated the clock on the wall, and the second hand kept a steady beat with his fingers drumming the side of the cot. Not that anyone had asked, but he had no words in his defense, and the sheriff did not return that night. After a few hours, the lamp sputtered out, and night closed in on his cell. The clock kept its perfect rhythm and, therefore, kept Zeke from sleep. The cold crept into the building, and the thin wool blanket did little to counter it. Eventually he dozed and spent the night shivering. Early Saturday morning, Zeke woke to the crunching of tiny teeth. The gray morning light streaked across the floor, where he spied a mouse gnawing on a crust in the corner. Zeke lay on his side and watched the furry animal until it scuttled off, afraid of Zeke's movement. He should feel some level of guilt for what he had done. The fire under his skin cooled enough for him to think clearly, but regret was not one of the emotions that currently plagued him. Men like Tobias were of the lowest kind. Zeke pushed the palms of his hands into his eyes, and visions of her face pained him. What could he do to be rid of thoughts of her? Eloise was not his problem. Someone needed to save her, but it wasn't him. A pain in his chest ached. He wondered what excuse Tobias used when he came home bruised. Did she tend his wound and sleep next to him, still living with the shame of her husband's behavior? His stomach rolled at the image of her tenderly wiping his face and talking softly to him. Zeke determined he needed to get out of this despicable town before he did something else he couldn't simply walk or ride away from. Was there no one to stand for justice? He grabbed the thin pillow and covered his face. Calculating his earnings for the week, he barely had enough to square with Palmer's, including the fees for laundry and meals. That left him enough for Susie Girl's shoe, and nothing else. When he ran out of air, he threw the pillow across the cell. It rattled the lock and dropped to the ground. It was another reminder of the mess he was in. Pulling his knees in, he rolled to the side that faced the wall. The front door opened, and he didn't bother to move. But the voice he heard was not the sheriff's. "Well, what a picture you make. This is what comes of sticking your head where it is not wanted." Simon Oakfield stood in the middle of the room. His voice put on a show that his posture betrayed. His nose pinched against some invisible odor, and he absently wiped his hands as if to remove the filth they'd acquired by entering such an establishment. Zeke stretched out on his back, crossing his hands behind his head. Too bad he'd thrown the pillow. Gazing at the spiderwebs that filled the corners of the rafters, gathering dust, he waited. When he was ready, he drawled out, "Hello, Simon. Nice of you to stop by." "Boy, sit up when I am talking to you." Simon tugged at his vest. "I am here to help, after all. Not that you deserve it after a stunt like that." He edged a step closer to the cell. "I'm listening." Zeke clenched fists of hair behind his head to keep from doing something impulsive. Putting on a front of disinterest, he succeeded in irking Simon further. Good. Simon was the last person he'd wanted to see, after Tobias, that is, and the last he had expected to come calling. "I could not help but notice your predicament, and if my observations are correct, you may be lacking the required funds necessary for the near future. I thought to myself, how inconvenient to be in a new town with no job, no money, and now no place to sleep outside of a jail. I was up half the night pondering how I could aid this poor soul. Of course, at first I was inclined to let the chips fall where they may, seeing as you did certainly bring about your own demise, as it were, but the Christian in me felt it necessary to help a brother in need, as Jesus specifically commanded us dutifully to visit those in prison, did he not? I do not wish to be found wanting. as he says, and I quote, "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." Well, then, here we are, you in prison, and I visiting. The pain of Zeke pulling out his own hair wasn't enough to keep him from surging toward the bars. The iron was sturdy, and only the bolt in the lock made noise when Zeke shook it. "I am not your brother, or your brethren. You may leave now." No. I have not told you why I have come." Zeke's stomach growled, and he realized his lack of breakfast was adding to his annoyance. "Get on with it." Simon sniffed absently. Removing his wallet, he counted out 5 bills. Holding them toward Zeke as if he would bite, he offered the cash. Zeke's gaze hardened. "What are you doing?" "What does it look like?" Simon shook his hand with the money. "I am helping you. Take the money, pay your debts, get out of town." "Or what?" The clock's ticking hand continued its path, shouting its presence into the uncomfortable room. "I need not stoop to threats. But if I were you, I would not be fain to stay in a town where I clearly was not wanted. If you know what is good for you, you would say thank you." Tick, 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 tick. Simon sighed when Zeke didn't move or acknowledge him. "Yes, well, I will leave this here." He rolled the money and, reaching through the bars, tucked it into Zeke's vest pocket. Wiping his hands on his side, his polished shoes clicked their way to the door. He turned back to smile and tipped his hat. "You are most welcome. I wish you well on your journey." Pacing the tiny room was worse than sitting. 3 steps one way, 2 another, and back again. Only 3 circuits later, he laid back on the cot and covered his ears to block out the incessant clock. "Rise and shine, man. Breakfast." The sheriff slammed a tray on the desk and whipped off the napkin. A simple plate of eggs, enough for 2 men, and 1 biscuit. Good to know he wouldn't starve. "Let's go." Keys jingled and the door squeaked open. "You're letting me go? Thank you, sir." "We're still working on your situation. It'll take some time to get to the bottom of this. You've got a mess on your hands, and I don't put up with your type, even if boss isn't pressing charges." The sheriff escorted Zeke to the outhouse and back to his cell for cold eggs. The sheriff was not forthcoming with any new information, and he stood with his arms crossed, watching Zeke eat. Fear of making his situation worse, Zeke didn't speak. Perhaps it was best to wait it out. He didn't have anything to say in his defense. He had, in all fairness, attacked Tobias, unprovoked, in the presence of a witness and a woman. The sheriff took his plate, fork, and empty cup, and left, leaving Zeke with the dry biscuit to nibble. He spent the next hour watching the clock. It had been 14 hours. He wondered what specific laws he had broken to warrant a situation, as the sheriff implied. The front door opened again. Zeke made sure to wipe his face of stray crumbs until he saw who it was. Simon Oakfield again. This time loaded with Zeke's bags. Keeping an air of disinterest wasn't possible this time. "What are you doing with my things?" Everything he owned in the world was in those bags, though it wasn't much, including his mother's jewelry, his Bible, and other keepsakes. "You had no right to go in my room." Zeke stood close to the bars. Simon only laughed. "It is not your room any more, not after Mrs. Palmer heard the news. You can imagine my hesitation to share the gritty details, but when you did not return last night, one thing led to another, and I was unable to remain silent. She is loath to let you return. Naturally, I offered my assistance. Anything I could do to help her during this stressful time. This has the possibility to leave quite a black mark on her establishment. She is usually more insightful in the type of men she accepts to board with her. Rooms do not remain empty for long. Therefore, she is relieved to be through with you. Oh, well, glad to see I did not miss you. I was afraid you might have skipped town already. Perhaps this evening for your release? I expected a simple overnight incarceration to be sufficient. I surmise the sheriff has his reasons. I am never one to question those in authority. Are you finished?" Zeke eyed his bags. The picture of Simon rifling through his things was not a pleasant one. Simon sniffed. and somehow managed to look down his nose, even though he was the one required to look up when Zeke stood to his full height. "Again, you are welcome. I have saved you from quite an unsavory meeting with Mrs. Palmer." "I'm not thanking you, and I'm formally requesting you cease all other forms of help you may be inclined to provide." He retained the spit he wanted to shoot at Simon's feet to punctuate his words. What a mouthful of words! He found simplicity worked better. He tried again. "Go away." "Very well. I can see when I am not appreciated. You should be so lucky as to have a friend like me looking out for your best interests." Simon dusted off his suit. "You have breakfast on your shirt. What a sight you are." "Get out." Zeke did not watch to see Simon leave. He listened to the footsteps and the door shut behind him. Absently he brushed the crumbs from his shirt and buried his face in the musty pillow, throwing the blanket over his head. The waiting and not knowing was difficult enough, without Simon popping in to pester him and rekindle his anger. It was too bad about Helen. He hadn't meant to hurt her, too. Losing his board wasn't something he'd considered when he'd gone after Tobias. He hadn't considered much of anything, or he wouldn't have let his temper run amok in the first place. He'd like to pretend his cause was purely for justice and not jealousy. If he couldn't be with Eloise, then at least her husband should treat her right. Even now, though he lay still, he felt coiled, ready to burst. Dreaming of ways to get back at Simon was not helping. With the roll of money pressed into his side, he made plans to spend it on something nice for Helen before he left town. Perhaps a new serving platter or a wash basin. He'd see what types of things the mercantile stocked. The front door squeaked open on its hinges, and Zeke tucked the blanket tightly around him. "Go away, Simon, and let a fellow rest in peace."
"Mr. James,"
a timid voice said. "Eloise?" Zeke jumped off the cot. The blanket came with him and tangled around his legs. Arms flailing, he tripped over his boots on the floor and stumbled to his hands and knees. A quick twist, a few kicks at the boots in his way, and he was on his feet again. He tossed the blanket on the bed and turned to face her, carefully. He combed his hair around his ears and tugged at his untucked shirt. He cleared his throat. She stood midway between the front door and his cell. Her eyes were wide, and her lips were parted. He grasped the bars, waiting for her to speak, imploring her to stay, to understand. His hair fell into his eyes, and he brushed it back. It fell down into his eyes again. Eloise's eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Her hair was in a haphazard braid down her back. Loose strands framed her face. Her appearance gave the impression she had been the one to spend a cold night on a hard cot with a musty pillow. Reaching a hand through the bars, he didn't expect her to take it, but the gesture came naturally. Desperately, he wished to be on the other side. "Eloise, can I explain? I'm—"
"Mr. James."
Moving away from him and taking a deep breath, she raised a hand to silence him. Her shoulders were stiff, and her chin jutted out determinedly.
"Listen carefully."
She swallowed. He ached to listen. He waited quietly, waited for her to begin. She swallowed again and pointed a finger at his chest.
"You will stay away from me, and you will stay away from my brother."
With skirts twisting around her feet, she turned and was out the door before he could respond. Zeke remained standing long enough that his feet grew cold on the stone ground. Her brother? Did he know her brother? He didn't know her brother. He ran through the list of men he'd been in contact with the past week. George, Jonas, Thomas, Charles. Not Simon, obviously. Roy? Maybe. As far as he could recollect, he did not know nor had ever met her brother. He and Eloise had conversed plenty of times, and she had never mentioned a brother. Still standing and staring at the far wall, he didn't move when the front door opened, letting in a blast of sunshine and warmer air. It was his foreman, D. Williams. Clearly it wasn't possible to land in jail and be left in peace. Did the whole town know of his foolishness? Maybe he should thank Simon for bringing his things and giving him the means to slink out without another word. "There you are." Dee removed his hat and shook out his straight blond hair, squinting in the low light of the room. I almost didn't believe it. I didn't take you for a fool. Clumsy, yeah. Easily distracted, sure. But not a fool. What possessed you? His strength outmatches you by a... I just don't get it. I knew you had eyes for Miss Davidson, but this is a strange situation. Zeke wasn't listening. Who is her brother? Dee stared at him. Mrs. Eloise Davidson. Zeke's volume rose. Who is her brother? Dee tapped his hat against his other hand. Eloise? She only has one. Motioning toward Zeke with his hat, he said, Don't change the subject. I'm here to officially discharge you from the brickyard, though you really would be a tenderfoot if you showed your face there again. As uncomfortable as it is here, it would be worse not to take care of this now. Answer the question, Zeke said. Who is he? Who is who? Zeke. Who knocked whose head? From what I heard, Boss didn't even take a punch. The brother. Tell me who her brother is. Dee looked at him as if he had sprouted feathers on his head. Are you fooling me? My wife was worried about you being here. She felt you might have been falsely accused. I'm going to call in the doctor. Zeke shook the bars, or tried to, but they wouldn't budge. Williams, so help me if you don't give me a name. Eloise Davidson has one brother. Tell me who it is. Dee shook his head. Tobias Franklin. Boss, the man you attacked. I'm going for the doctor now. The wife might be right about you. How does your head feel? Zeke melted. He sank slowly to the floor, running his hands down the bars, and relaxed into a sitting position on the hard floor. Crossing his legs, he rested his forehead against a bar. Who does Luke belong to? He whispered. Boss? Zeke scrubbed his face. You're telling me Eloise isn't married? She's a widow. A widow. A widow? Eloise Davidson was a widow. Chipmunk was not married. Eloise Davidson was not married. Not married! She was single. She was beautiful. She was the most lovely thing he'd ever seen. She didn't have a kid, and she was not Boss's wife. He was not jealous or coveting Boss's wife. She was living with her brother. Her brother! Her brother! He had punched her brother. Twice, at least. He had ruthlessly attacked her brother in front of another woman out of sheer jealousy, which didn't make any sense, because he was her brother, not her husband. Hey, said Dee, getting his attention, startling Zeke. Don't hang up your fiddle, man. You've got to pay attention. Listen to me, and get up off that floor. You look ridiculous. And put your shoes on. Yes, sir, Zeke obeyed, first one boot and then the other, all the while attempting to process this new information. Tobias Franklin. Franklin. Mr. Franklin. Eloise was not married, and he was a fool. Tobias was not her husband. And Simon. Simon? He brushed Simon away. He would deal with Simon later. He looked up to find Dee waiting expectantly for the answer to another question he hadn't heard. Pardon? Dee shook his head. That's it. I'm fetching Doc to have your head checked. No, don't. I'm all right. Just stay. I didn't know he wasn't, seeing other women. Hear me out. Zeke finished with his boots and walked back to Dee. Please. All right, start talking. I have somewhere to be. I don't get paid to guard prisoners. She was married to Philip. It wasn't a question. All the pieces began clicking together. Yes? I didn't know he wasn't cheating on her. Eloise deserves more, and she just took it. It's not right, for a man to treat his wife like that. When she talked about the situation, you could just see in her face how hard it is for her. I mean, no man should be allowed to carry on like that. Stop, Dee said. You're not making any sense. Tobias is her brother, Zeke said. Yes, we've established that. I didn't know she had a brother. She spoke of a husband and a father-in-law. She cares for his son. They live in the same house. She wears a gold ring on her left hand. Zeke faltered, sinking down on the cot. He held his head between his hands. And now I'm in here for defending the honor of a woman who didn't need my help. I have betrayed her trust. She'll never forgive me. The laugh lines around Dee's eyes creased. Snow og freder smelte med tiden. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Both snow and anger melt with time. Dee laughed as he adjusted his hat and turned to leave. You're all right, Zeke. You're still fired. But you're all right.